Good afternoon. My name is Cutler Cleveland. I'm a professor at Boston University and the author of Energy and Climate, a primer, the first born digital textbook on this important subject. I'll be leading the webinar today. So just a couple introductory remarks before we dive into a demonstration of the book. I am a professor at Boston University in the Department of Earth and Environment, where I've taught and performed research in the area of energy and environmental science and their connections to society for the past 25 years. I teach undergraduate classes in environmental science and upper level classes in various courses related to energy, including the connection between energy and climate change. As part of my research, I've produced a number of major reference works with Elsevier science publishers, including the Encyclopedia of Energy, the dictionary, and most recently the 2-volume work on the Handbook of Energy. So a little bit of background on the motivation for producing a digital textbook. Most of you are quite aware that the educational landscape is changing rather quickly, both in terms of how content is produced and delivered, and also how it's delivered in the classroom by instructors and how it's consumed by students. And there really are 4 important driving trends in educational technology. One is the trend towards modular digital content, the ability to take a particular subject, such as energy and climate, although it could be any subject from medicine to Shakespeare, and chop that up into individual pieces, individual modulars, and be able to recombine, reuse, and repurpose that content in ways that suit individual instructors. That modular digital content increasingly is driven with rich media, video, audio, and so on. It's delivered and distributed in the cloud. And by cloud, I mean the situation where a single provider provides content and distributes it to a wide audience through a single app, and where the consumers of that, in this case instructors or readers or students, do not have to download any app, any software, do any modifications to use that content, except to have access to the web. And the content is elastic, meaning the user can take whatever bite-sized chunk they want of the content and use it at their pace. And another important aspect of digital content is accessibility. It has to be accessible anywhere, anytime, and on any device. Another important trend is the ability to customize content. Instructors increasingly want content that they can use and organize, modify, and otherwise produce in a form that's suitable for their classroom, all the way down to being able to develop content for a one-to-one teaching or learning experience. Another important aspect or technology driver is real-time content creation. Those of you who work or teach in the area of energy and climate know that information is rapidly changing. Economic conditions change, policies change, science advances at a very rapid clip. And so the traditional review cycle for print textbooks is far too long to keep up with that. So one of the beauties of the type of platform and authoring tool and teaching tool I'm about to demonstrate is that you can create content in real time and push it to users instantaneously. And finally, the 4th important driver is collaboration. Those of you who know who teach young adults in the classroom or interact with young adults, they live in social networking, the ability to communicate using the web, using their phones, and so on. And so we're increasingly challenged to leverage that social networking to improve student learning outcomes, whether it's through teacher to student communication or student to student communication. So with that in mind as sort of the drivers, we now turn to the book itself, the digital textbook, and illustrate how this book was developed to respond to those drivers. And so the primer is the first, what we call born digital source for current, objective, and accessible information regarding the connections between energy use, climate change, and sustainability. Born digital in the sense that it's was never published in print form and was written natively in the digital environment, taking advantage of all the tools available to producing work on the web. So the features that I'll demonstrate are the 11 content modules. So self-contained but interconnected modules which walk through what climate change is and how climate change is connected to energy use and what drives energy use, and finally what the policy instruments are to address the climate energy interconnection. It has much of the rich media associated with what is possible on the web, videos, dynamic glossary, and self-assessment outcomes embedded in the text itself to improve student learning outcomes. It has a substantial package of instructor resources, PowerPoints for each module, a test bank, lots of links to resources on the web that are updated, and the ability to customize content for your particular learning instance. The primer also has a significant amount of supplementary content that I'll demonstrate, a chronology of climate change, tracing its current state of the art back to its historic roots, an art gallery which gives users access to lots of high-resolution graphics depicting important data, relationships, and trends, an annotated bibliography of sources to go for energy statistics. I include this because I've always been peppered by students on where to find information. Where do I find reliable information about energy, particularly data and statistics? So I've compiled a nice list of that, and some unit and conversion factors that are used commonly in climate science and the energy fields. And so all this is priced at $25, and the book is intended, the e-textbook is intended to be used as a supplement for classes that deal with a wide range of energy and environment, and particularly climate issues, as well as a wide range of analysts, researchers, or just anyone who's interested in this important issue. So what are some of the benefits of this for students? All content is in the cloud, so all you need is access to the internet. The content is device agnostic. It works on OS and Macintosh systems. It works on laptops, pads, both Mac and Android, and it works on phones, both the iPhone and Android phones. It has easy to follow sequence and navigation. I've already mentioned the built-in self-assessment. Has some personalized tools for students relating to highlighting and annotation. It becomes a permanent online reference for students that is updated and is a pretty moderately priced resource. For instructors, the ability to use modular content to package it in ways that they want. The book also has a lightweight learning management system that the content is embedded in, which includes communication, gradebook, the ability to give online assignments and quizzes, and so on. And as I've mentioned, for both students and faculty and any reader, the content is continuously kept up to date. So with that brief overview in mind, let me turn to the content itself. So this is the way the book is presented, and what you see spilling down the page are the 11 modules which constitute the bulk of the information related to the primer. and I'm going to go through those modules quickly. But before I do so, I want to show you some general features related to search and discovery on the platform. So note up here in the gray tab, there's a textbook glossary link, and the book has a substantial glossary of about 140 or 150 glossary terms that are used throughout the text, and they're listed here in alphabetical order. You can search the glossary, and as you do so, it autofills the terms that you're looking for. And in this case, I typed in carbon dioxide, and it shows me the various terms that have carbon dioxide in the title or used in the definition, which not surprisingly is quite a few terms in a text on climate change. So that's searching the glossary, and the students have access to the glossary wherever they are in the book. If I go up here to the search window just above that, which is going to search the entire site, I'll also search for carbon dioxide, and it gives me the different search returns based on that particular search term. So for example, if I click on module 3, it will take me to that particular entry. And here we see the basic structure of the individual modules and how students would actually read or consume the content. So this happens in module 3, which is discusses what combustion is and how it releases carbon dioxide and black carbon. So a couple of things to note right away how this is different than a regular book. The first is as it has a video embedded in it. So this is a very powerful learning experience enrichment that is woven throughout the book. There are nearly 40 videos distributed across the 11 modules, which are used either to help explain a basic concept, such as this first video, which is admittedly a somewhat dry description, but nevertheless a very clear and succinct description of what combustion is, all the way down to videos which are a bit more engaging and interactive and are meant to illustrate concepts related to the particular topic at hand. So this is a video that I always love to use, which shows the actual combustion inside a coal-fired power plant. And that's a pretty powerful experience if you've never actually seen that, to see obviously the intense temperature, but also all the slag from the coal ash being dropped into the bottom of the furnace, and just the what combustion really is. And as I scroll further down this page, you can see the ability to include very high resolution images, which you can't do in a print book. This happens to be black carbon. Here's smog over Beijing's Forbidden City. And then here's another video related to biomass fires, which are an important source of black carbon. And this is a great NASA video which shows the animation of global fires on an annual basis using remotely sensed data. And I always love to show Africa in my class because we talk about it in a variety of ways. So you can see the tremendous learning enrichment you can get from embedding appropriate videos in the content. So while we're on this particular module, let me show you some of the other features of the content. You can see the terms in a dark blue, which are glossary terms. And if I click on a glossary term, it shows me the definition of that term. So students have access to the glossary as they go. And also, as I scroll down, you can see internal links, or internal and external links. So here's a link to an external study by the Health Effects Institute, which describes the health impacts of particulate on human health. And at the bottom of the module are some additional features that every module encompasses. One is a summary of key concepts, so the reader has a succinct summary of what was covered. It has a section on resources on the web, so these are external links where readers can go to find additional information on the topic covered by the module. It also has some of the primary sources that were used to write this particular module. And down at the very bottom, it has self-assessment. So every module has a group of self-assessment questions, which allows the reader to test their knowledge of a particular module before they move on to the next module. These are interactive questions that aren't graded. So for example, I click on question 1, the combustion of what fuel is described by this process. So if I pick motor gasoline, it tells me that's the wrong answer, and it tells me why. And then if I picked methane, it would tell me I got the correct answer. And then I can go down to question 2. This process describes incorrect answer, and also it tells me again why that answer was incorrect, and so on. And so the student can check their learning as they go. And I found that this is a very powerful learning tool for students. So instead of waiting to the end of the chapter, as they move through the material at important checkpoints, they get feedback on how well they have mastered the content. And then at the bottom of every article, there's a list of all the glossary terms that were used in this module. So that gives you a brief overview of the structure of a module itself. So let's go back to the landing page and look at the actual sequence of the content. So this primer is designed to walk the reader through the connection between energy and climate, starting from the very basics, which in the case of climate is what climate change actually is. And in the case of energy use, what types of energy there are, what are hydrocarbons, how does combustion release carbon dioxide, and so on, and then up to the connection between combustion and greenhouse gases and onwards through the causal chain, what eventually leads up to policies or different ways of reducing emissions. So let's just quickly walk through this. So Module 1 is an overview of the nature of climate change. And this is principally a summary of the most recent work published by the U.S. Global Climate Change Program and the forthcoming IPCC assessment. And it simply summarizes, what climate change is, the effects of climate change in terms of their effects on hydrology, food production, sea level rise, potential impact on tropical cyclones and hurricanes. Again, we have some videos that expand on important key points. In this case, sea level rise and why it's important to understand how the thermal expansion of water contributes to sea level rise, causes of climate change. Again, some nice supplementary activity describing the sunspot cycle, which is important to understanding the contribution of natural variation to climate change, the effects of volcanoes, and so on. The next module talks about energy and talks about what hydrocarbons are, an overview of global energy use, the importance of hydrocarbons, particularly fossil fuels, how they have remained important for a very long period of time, despite energy price shocks and wars and climate change. Fossil fuels today contribute almost about the same to total primary energy consumption in the world as they did 25 years ago. Then it talks about fossil fuels, how they're formed, sort of the nature of hydrocarbons, the processing of hydrocarbons into refined fuels in refineries and so on. Talks a lot about that process. And again, you see the summary, self-assessment, and so on. It's typical of every module. The next module deals with the combustion byproducts, carbon dioxide and black carbon, which we've already talked about. The next module deals with greenhouse gas emissions, looks at the trend in emissions, some international comparisons of emissions, and how you translate emissions into concentrations, which of course is what's most important in terms of radiative forcing. We look at the ice core record, talk about the Mauna Loa curve, and some of the, there's a nice little piece here by Keeling's son, who describes the evolution of the Mauna Loa curve that his father, Charles Keeling, developed. Really nice little piece there. And what some of the causes of increasing emissions are. The next module connects rising concentrations with a phenomenon known as global warming. So we start with a very simple description of the Earth's radiation budget, a video regarding the greenhouse effect, characteristics of greenhouses. We get into the concept of radiative forcing, comparing the human and natural forcings, and so on. The next module talks about, okay, so we now know that what climate change is, and it's caused in part by concentrations. We know that come from anthropogenic activity, particularly fossil fuels, or how much fossil fuel remains in the Earth's crust. And here we go into the notion of resource classification. How do you begin to talk about and to know how much oil and gas and coal remains to be found? So we talk about reserve classification, the distinction between reserves and resources, and then various estimates of fossil fuel remaining. And here I summarize a lot of the work that's out there, the range of estimates, and when it comes right down to it, we talk about fracking, unconventional gas resources, and so on, the different carbon content of fuels. You come to the rather startling observation that the amount of carbon left in the Earth's crust in the form of fossil fuels is a staggeringly large quantity relative to what we've already produced, which means we have some serious challenges facing us. So then module 7 then moves to, okay, fossil fuels are a driver behind all these changes. How can we start talking about reducing emissions? So we begin with the discussion in a theoretical way, particularly in the context of marginal abatement cost curves. How do you stack up different ways of reducing emissions in terms of cost? And we introduce marginal abatement cost curves and how to read them. Some of you have probably seen this work by McKinsey and Company, very widely publicized piece of work which arranges measures to abate carbon by increasing cost, and shows there's a wide range of, on both the supply and the demand side, ways to reduce emissions. Then the next module, the next 3 modules walk through then the different ways to reduce emissions. The first way is to switch to low carbon energy sources. So here we talk about different forms of energy and their carbon content. We talk about electricity generation, look at life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, introduce the concept of how you define and measure life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, and not surprisingly, the renewable sources and nuclear energy have very low emissions. Look at transportation fuels and their lifetime greenhouse gas emissions by source, which shows an important result that these very large-scale unconventional energy sources like Canadian oil sands and the heavy oil in Venezuela have significantly greater greenhouse gas potential because of their chemical nature and the cost of extracting them. And then we go to some work which looks at the greenhouse gas emissions for different transportation vehicles, using different fuels and different vehicles, which again shows that renewable energy has a lower footprint. Electric vehicles are interesting, but it really depends on where you get the electricity to power that electric vehicle. If it comes from a wind turbine, great. If it comes from a coal plant, not so good. Module 9 turns to another way to reduce emissions, which is on the demand side, and talks about energy efficiency, and goes through a fairly detailed description of what the barriers are to energy efficiency and low carbon technologies, talking about market failures, externalities, energy security externalities, spillover effects, and these a long list of well-documented deviations from the market ideal, which lead to barriers to adopting low carbon technologies and energy efficiency. The principal agent problem, for example, why a landlord versus a tenant have different incentives, have split incentives to adopt energy efficient appliances or insulation. We talk about regulatory failures and fiscal barriers that different governments face, and right on down the list through these different scenarios. One interesting barrier that I talk about, the so-called, what economists call non-optimal consumer behavior, is the challenge of getting consumers to understand information presented to them about energy conservation choices. And one of those, a good illustration of that is what's called the MPG, or miles per gallon illusion, where it turns out people's choice on what type of vehicle to buy hinges in part on how you present information to them, whether you present information in terms of miles per gallon or gallons used per mile. Because of this nonlinear relationship between the two, shown on the graph on the left, people tend to make bad, in quotes, decisions about vehicle choices because of the way in the US we present information to them regarding this impact. We then talk about barriers to adoption of energy efficient technologies and low carbon that are not related to market failure, one of which is cost. So here we talk about levelized cost for electricity generation in the United States. So, solar photovoltaic in the US has a very low carbon footprint, but it's also still extremely expensive, at least in any type of base load generating capacity. And combined cycle natural gas and wind and even conventional coal with carbon capture and storage are cheaper or as cheap as solar photovoltaic. So these are some of the challenges that they face. Of course, the cost of solar and many renewables are dropping quickly, so this is a dynamic process. Then the next module deals with carbon capture and storage. Another way to reduce emissions is to trap the carbon underground, and this goes through the latest discussion of technologies associated with this, their impact on cost, their practical availability, and so on. And the last module deals with pricing carbon. How do we incorporate these externalities into the price of carbon so that producers and consumers are sent the appropriate signals? And talks out with a nice little piece by Lester Brown, Thomas Friedman, and Paul Krugman on carbon tax versus cap and trade. So we go through what cap and trade is and the carbon tax, talk about recent experience, particularly what's happening in Europe. And here's where the ability to update content on the fly is so important, and how I've used it recently. So if you've been following what's happening in Australia, Australia was one of the first to adopt a carbon tax. Administrations changed, and that carbon tax was very unpopular, and they're now making a transition or trying to make a transition to a cap and trade. And it's a very fluid environment, and every few weeks I go in and modify the entry here on what's happening in Australia to be consistent with what's actually happening in the ground, on the ground. And when you make a change and click publish, that update is immediately pushed to all users of the book. So that's quite an amazing feature of this type of digital content. So that's a brief walk through the primer itself. Each one of those modules has self-assessment questions. And now I want to turn to the supplementary material, which is shown over here on the menu on the left. So in addition to the modules, we have a chronology of climate change. So this is a walk through all the major milestones on the science, economics, policy associated with climate change, starting from the early work by John Tyndall and Svante Arrhenius and so on, Milankovitch, all the way up through the work done in the 50s and 60s, where some of this was first identified, through the IPCC, and all the way up through 2014, which is when the fifth IPCC assessment report will be produced. Another feature we have here is an art gallery, what I call an art gallery. And here we have some high resolution images that are available which depict important trends in various aspects of the energy and climate issue. They all have fairly detailed explanations, and you can click on any of these, and this happens to be the trend in oil discoveries in the United States, and you can simply drag this to your desktop and you have available a high resolution image that you can use in a PowerPoint or some other presentation. It has a variety of energy and climate use. Here's the instrumental temperature record. What else do we have? We have the Mauna Loa curve, the Keeling curve. And again, these are updated on the fly. When new data comes out, we simply push updated versions of this. The relationship between energy use per capita and GDP per capita. Carbon content of fuel. Here's a graph showing radiative forcing, teasing out natural and anthropogenic issues, drivers, and so on. So this is a growing library. I'm adding to this constantly and updating the information as new information becomes available. Another resource are energy statistics. So this is simply an annotated bibliography of different places to go for energy statistics by subject area. So general statistics, the U.S. Department of Energy, the IEA, and it gives a description of what's there, what's free, what's not free, World Energy Council, and then as you scroll down further, you get into subject fuel-specific resources, nuclear energy, renewable energy, and so on. There's also a fairly substantial units and conversion section specific to energy and climate and energy in the context of climate change. So different carbon conversions that you might want to use, quantities used in CO2 research, radiative forcing data, heat content, carbon content of fuels, and so on. Lots of useful information there. Another resource of links, and these are simply all the links that are in the individual modules assimilated into one spot for easy access. So you can go through here and all the external links, which contain links to lots of good resources, are available there. And last but not least, instructor resources. So if you are thinking of adopting this for a class, there's a test bank here, which includes, it's a Microsoft Word document that includes test questions related to the modules, and there are PowerPoint presentations for each module, which include all the images. In this case, the first module, all the images associated with each module with their figure legend, which you are free to adapt and use. So that's a very quick overview of the content in the primer. And the last thing I want to do before we turn to your questions is to talk about how, if you adopt this as an instructor for a class, how you can customize the content. And I will add at this point, when you logged into the webinar, in the control panel, there's a panel within that which is labeled questions, and if you type your questions into that, they'll pile up there, and I see there are some already, and I will answer them at the end of the webinar. So feel free to type in your questions to the question panel in the GoToMeeting control panel. So let's say you wanted to use this in your class. So how does that work? So the way that works is we take this canonical or base version of the book and we clone it and place it at a URL for your class. And then you, as the instructor, have control over that site. And you send the URL for your class website to your students in your class, and they go navigate to that URL. They have their registered name, email address. They pay $25, which is the cost of the module, and then they're in. And then they have a personalized version of the book, and so they can annotate it. One thing I didn't show you, which I'll show you briefly, is a bookmarking capability. I showed you the annotation capability. If I wanted to bookmark this page, I go up here in the upper right and click Bookmarks and say bookmark this page. So now this module is bookmarked, and wherever I go in the book, that bookmark will be there. I can always navigate back to it. So students customize their content, and every time they log in, when they come back to the primer, they are in their version of the class, their version of the primer. So let's say you had some lecture notes for the PowerPoint presentations that you had customized, and you wanted to add the lecture notes to this. So I could go up here now in the far upper left, which says add content. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to say add article. So now I'm in editing mode. So now I'm actually an author creating content for my personal course. And so I'm going to just say, I'm going to call this lecture notes. And let's say, like most of us, you probably have your lecture notes in a Microsoft Word document. So over here on my desktop, I conveniently have a document called Climate Change Lecture Notes. I'm going to open that. So notice that it's a Word document. It's got a little bit of formatting in it, some hyperlinks. And all I'm going to do is select all and copy. I'm going to close this, go back to my editor. You can see up in the panel here, it says paste from Word. I'm going to click that, and I'm just going to say paste. And it's going to dump that content in there. I'm going to click OK. So now my Word document is in. All the formatting has been retained, including the hyperlinks. And I click Create. And I'm going to publish it, which means it is viewable by the students. So now I have my lecture notes, which are shown here. So where are they? Let's go back to the landing page. And now you can see at the bottom of the table of contents is now this article that I just created, lecture notes. But let's say I want those to go first, to be at the top where students always have them available. So I go up to my editing wheel up here in the upper right and click Content Sequence. I'm going to click that. It shows me the contents. I'm going to take lecture notes and drag them up to the top. Click Save Order. And now my lecture notes are here at the top, the first order of business. Students click on these, have the lecture notes, and then can start reading the content. let's say I use a lot of video in my class, and actually oftentimes use video and require students to watch the video and then engage in a discussion either in class or online in a forum about the video. So let's say I wanted to start this whole module off, this whole primer off with a video discussion. So let's say I go to do a Google search for a video on sea level rise, which I've done here. It shows me some results that have been returned. And I click on this one, which happens to be on YouTube, and it's about a simulation of what sea level rise might mean for the city of Miami. Let's say I review this, I like it, I want to include it. I'm going to go up here to the URL and copy the video ID, go back to my book, and now I'm going to go up in the upper left again and say add content. I'm going to add video, and I'm going to call it Miami sea level rise. My video source, in this case, is YouTube. We handle lots of different video sources. I'm just going to paste the YouTube URL. I could write a description here if I wanted it, the assignment for the students, and then click Create, publish it. And now I have a video created on sea level rise, which is now on the platform. Again, I go back to the table of contents. You can see the video is down here at the bottom. And again, if I wanted to, maybe I wanted to put this, whoops, wrong button, content sequence. So maybe I actually want to put this video up here after the nature of climate change, where I actually talk about some of the impacts. So now you can see that video is now placed where I want. So the instructors have this ability to add content and customize it, move things around to teach in a way that's most effective for their class. What I haven't shown you, but I will just describe briefly, is what's I call a lightweight learning management system. This platform has the ability to give exams and quizzes and assignments online. These are some fake students, people in my company here, that are in this grade book, but you have the ability to give online exams, load those questions into a question pool, give online exams, and grade everything online, and you can export the grade book in it as an Excel spreadsheet where it could connect to the learning management system that you use at your institution. So that's a very brief, or maybe not so brief, overview of the Energy and Climate Primer. And before I end, let me just put up my contact information. So you have that in case there are any questions. I'm available. I guess I didn't put that slide in, but anyways, my email address is Cutler, my first name, @bu.edu. You can reach me there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that that you might have. So let me now turn to some of the questions that people have raised and answer those in turn. And one question is, how do you manage the potential for broken links to external resources? So this platform has a feature that on a time step that you choose, it could be daily, but typically we do it weekly or monthly, it goes over the entire module and checks every link. And it checks every link to make sure that the link, if it's an external link, the link that it's pointing to is actually there. And if it's not, you get a report. And so you can keep track of links, make them active as you go. Can the viewer zoom in on text? So the reader itself doesn't have the ability to zoom in on text, but you can control that through your browser functionality and highlight and improve the text in that way. Let's see some other questions. Can students make notes themselves in the margins? Can they highlight in the body of the text? So they can highlight in the body of the text. So if I'm reading along here and I have a particular term that I think is important, I can highlight that string, click annotate, and type a note into myself. So this is where the note taking comes in, and click save. And so now that particular annotation, that string is highlighted. If I roll my mouse over, it gives me that annotation. If I click on it, I can edit it, change it, or even delete it. In this case, I'm going to delete it. We do not have the ability right now to make notes in the margin, although in our near-term technology roadmap, that capability will be included. Can students ask questions while they read and expect an instructor to supply? So the short answer to that is yes, and you can do that by and this is under the instructor control, by turning on and off the commenting functionality. So if I go up here under edit content, and I can do this as an instructor, there is the ability to, I'm down here at the bottom, include user comments. And so what this does is turn on the ability to have a threaded discussion. So now if I go back down to the bottom of this article, you'll see, like in many cases, you now have the ability to add comments. And so if you wanted to, so students could either leave comments for themselves or have their own conversations, or on a particular concept, an instructor could lead a threaded discussion using this feature. And your question is, can they can students ask questions while they read and expect an instructor to reply? My response to that is it all depends on the instructor, whether or not he or she is going to be engaged in this type of interaction. I do it with my students, but some people aren't interested in doing that. Instructor has option to include lecture notes. Do students have the option to include his or her own notes from lectures? So we don't, the ability to include notes in the text itself, it currently does not exist for students, other than in the case of the annotation where they can include notes, but that note-taking ability is on the near-term 3 to 6 month technology roadmap. Let's see, what else we have? This is really great content presented in an engaging way. How does this look and work across platforms such as a laptop and a tablet? So all of our content is tested on different operating systems, different browsers, and different devices. And almost all the functionality you see here is fully available on laptops, pads, and phones, including both Apple and Android pads and phones. I think my students prefer this interactive digital book over a dead tree book. Do you happen to have any feedback from your students using a digital textbook? Yes, I've used an environmental science textbook produced on this platform, and I don't think you'll be surprised to know, if you teach 18-year-olds, that they don't miss the 4-pound, $150 paperweight known as a textbook carrying around their backpack. And overwhelmingly, they prefer content in the studies we've done quite a bit of assessment in the classroom. They prefer content in this digital form. One last question here. I'm authoring a book to use in my class, and this platform looks very slick. How would I self-publish on Trinity? So yeah, if you have content, it could be a full-blown book, it could be a couple modules like this, even just stuff for your class that you want to publish, you can use the platform to do that and distribute it to students or even to other people beyond the classroom, and perhaps make a little bit of money for yourself. One of the nice things about the authoring platform on Trinity is that the royalty sharing for authors is significantly better than it is for traditional publishers. Typically, the royalty share starts at about 50-50 on the Trinity platform as opposed to 8 to 12% for the authors with the traditional print publisher. So it's pretty easy. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. Cutler at bu.edu, and I'd be happy to talk to you about authoring on the platform. So another question, will there be a link to this presentation to watch it again? The answer is yes. This is being recorded, I do believe, and we will send out to all webinar attendees, and even those who registered but didn't actually attend, we'll send a link to the presentation, and it will be at the Trinity website. So thank you for that. Thank you for reminding me to inform people of that. So those are all the questions that I see. So again, I'll end by thanking you for your time. And again, any questions, cutler@bu.edu, and I'd be happy to talk to you about the product or about authoring possibilities on the Trinity platform. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day.